Let's take a step back to recap. Similar to the Lebanese Civil War, we can look at the factional infighting that has occurred along the way. The LGBT movement had strong support from almost all political groups in the UK, with only a small minority of people opposed to rights for gays, lesbians, bisexuals and transsexuals. Then the transgender ideology came along, bringing with it identity politics and a huge amount of different, ever more specific gender identities. This included the furries, rubber pups, drag artists, cross-dressers, and most problematically, autogynephilic men, turning it from a movement based on a person's sexuality to one based on a person's gender identity, changing the LGB to LGBTQIA+. Transsexuals were bullied out by this new community and transgender took over within the movement. The likes of Stonewall and Mermaid supported this move towards transgenderism and away from sexuality, and the trans rights activists sprung forth using Tumblr, Reddit and Twitter to harass, abuse and bully people into believing their ideology. The police were used by the trans rights activists groups to enforce their tactics after the police were pushed into the ideology by groups such as Stonewall and Mermaids. Left-wing media outlets like Pink News, The Guardian and Novara Media jumped at the chance to report on the gender ideology movement and away from the typical stories concerning gay and lesbian issues. Trolls and men's rights activists have used the transgender ideology as a screen from behind which they can bully and harass women. Seeing this, many lesbians have left the movement along with feminists, most of whom were or are Labour members, causing a huge split on this issue within the party. Many groups have been set up to fight for women's existing rights, such as A Woman's Place UK. And people with intersex conditions, many of whom were unhappy being dragged into the trans community to begin with, have disassociated themselves from the movement. More recently, a lot of gay men and bisexuals have also left, and the sexuality-based LGBT Alliance group, which also includes transsexuals, was created to give them support and fight for their rights, after the failings of Stonewall and the transgender movement became apparent. The scientific community, especially the fields of biology and evolutionary biology, have also begun to question or oppose the trans rights activists, as have former transgender people themselves. Politically, while half of the Labour Party, Lib Dems and Greens have thrown their weight behind the gender ideology movement, the Conservatives have decided to take a step back, listening to women's concerns. This has formed a very uneasy alliance with many on the gender critical side, who mostly hold very traditionally left-wing beliefs. There has been a shift within the gender ideology movement to view sexuality as somewhat harmful, unhealthy or outdated, all words which are direct recent quotes from trans activists and not conjecture. The movement is seeking to replace the terms lesbian, gay and bisexual with new terms including pangender, gender fluid or queer gender. This means that LGB people would no longer be part of their own LGB movement, and instead the transgender ideology would be the de facto leaders of a movement that is heavily associated by the public with gay, lesbian and bisexual people. This increase in transgenderism has seen a huge rise in the power of abusive trans rights activists, many of whom are not transsexuals but heterosexuals and AGP men. I know this is confusing and it can be hard to see the wood for the trees, but let's simplify our illustration here. Firstly, let's assume that all of the 700 plus genders are included under the trans banner. Secondly, we can take political parties out of the equation too. Finally, let's take out the trolls, the social media platforms and other media being used. If we then tidy things up, it gives us a very clear distillation of the issues at hand. The transgender movements, led by abusive trans rights activists, autogynephilic men, and supported by Stonewall, Mermaids and the police, aided by the men's rights movement, are all opposed to homosexual transsexuals, lesbians, gay men and bisexuals, feminists and their allies, people who have detransitioned, intersex people, and the concept of science itself. It's the complete reversal of the entire LGB movement. It's gone from supporting LGB rights against oppression to support oppression of LGB, transsexual, intersex and women's rights. However, they still receive the funding, corporate sponsorship, media time and other things hard won by the LGB community over the decades.
I think it's silly to have anything other than two genders. So
Okay.
Anything else is a personal
Could you please keep that opinion to your own house? Thank you. Not in the
So
school.
you get to put your opinion out in class, and my
No,
opinion.
I am not.
My opinion has to stay inside
I am
my
not
house.
putting my opinion. I am not putting my opinion out. I am stating what is national school authority policy. Okay?
Well, it's not scientific whatsoever. You don't have to kick me out of class.
I'm
and
sorry,
waste 30 minutes of my time, where I could have been down revising, doing something else. Instead, I state something I believe in. You kick me out of class for 30 minutes. And I'm waiting on.
Take this somewhere else. You can make an official complaint.
I'm not going to
Please
make
do.
an official complaint.
Why not?
I just think it's.
I know what you think, and I know what the authority thinks. I know what the authority's point of view.
Well, I know
it's
what
very
science thinks.
clear that we make no discrimination on the grounds of various...
I wasn't making discrimination. I'm simply saying there are two genders, male and female.
Yeah.
Anything else is a personal identification.
So please, can you tell me what a woman is?
Well, I know I'm a woman, and I think we know what we are.
So how can you tell what a woman is?
Well, I'm just sort of trying to understand, what you're getting at. I think we know when we engage with each other, when we know if we are a woman, right? And I can tell you that I am, right? So, and we're not going to.
What if a man wears a dress to work twice a week? Is he a woman?
Not necessarily.
But could he be?
Well, I think.
If you dress as a woman twice a week to go to work, do you count whose gender pay gap? Do you count as a woman for the gender pay or a man?
Well, clearly, in terms of the gender pay gap, members of staff will identify their gender in company records to HR typically, and the company will then produce the statistics accordingly.
Anna, can I explain why this has become a talking point within the Liberal Democrat campaign? It's because you've promised complete reform of the Gender Recognition Act and effectively said you will remove the need for medical tests and feeds, that individuals will be able to self-identify. And there is a significant body of women who feel that they will be deprived of safe spaces.
Yes, obviously we respect people and everyone has a right to express themselves, and people's choice of partner, spouse, clothing should not be affected by their sex in any way. But under self-ID, what's to stop a male sex offender walking into the changing room and say, do you know what, today I identify a woman as a woman? Should we be kind and let him?
So, I mean, in a sense...
We have women's spaces as a safeguard from men, don't we?
But
yeah, of course.
I was just going to say, so,
if we're leaving it up to women to have to police their own spaces, that's why it's a difficult issue, isn't it? Conflicting rights. We have women's spaces as a safeguard from men because we know men murder women, men rape women, voyeur upskirting just become a crime. People put cameras in changing rooms. That's why we have these women's spaces. And the feelings of a small number of people do not in any way reduce the threat of men. So that's why we need to think and discuss and talk openly about it. And that's what I'm asking you. Whereas if we go straight for the reform that you're suggesting, and people like me are given abuse for even talking about this, saying, look, we're not, even if every single trans person in the world has, is fantastic and wonderful and kind and brilliant, that does not reduce the threat from men in any way.
And I suppose the argument, if you like, is on what's the best way to provide that protection, because
at the moment we're just making all women's toilets intended to unisex toilets. That's not a solution.
You've also said you want all schools to introduce gender neutral uniform. Does that apply to religious schools as well?
I just think, a
headscarf is not gender neutral.
Look,
but if a girl wanted to turn up at a school without a headscarf, but the school policy was all girls must wear a headscarf, that would be problematic for you, would it?
Well, I think children should have choices.
But if you are saying or leaving it open for interpretation that a gay person cannot say, I would not be attracted to a trans person without being transphobic, that's poking your nose into their life.
Again, Stephen, I think it's the premise of the trope. For a long time we've talked about the idea of people having types and everything else like that, and I think that increasingly is becoming outdated, that people look for something much different in a partner and somebody that they may wish to date or to form a stable relationship.
Are you saying people can't have a type of person they're attracted to without being described as being discriminatory?
No, I'm saying that I think that's an outdated concept.
Well, having a type of person you're attracted to?
Yes.
That's outdated? But can I put it to you, Seamus, that there may be quite a few people listening to this programme today who you lose when you say that it is outdated and therefore we should feel old-fashioned in some way if people are thinking that they've got a type of person that they're sexually attracted to. Is this not political correctness gone crazy?
No, it's not, Stephen. We want for people to be able to develop healthy and stable relationships, and to focus everything on appearance and people's physical characteristics is not a healthy thought or association with that.
Is it not part of human nature that people can't help who they're attracted to? You know, they're either attracted to people or they're not. No?
But when we characterise that down and boil it down to this idea of types and focusing on, like I said, physical characteristics, that is an unhealthy basis for a sole basis for a relationship. And again, relates back to the fact...
So you just said it was unhealthy?
I think you're totally mischaracterising what I said, Stephen, which doesn't surprise me whatsoever. But I think it's very clear...
I don't think there's any need to be disrespectful to me. If you want to come on, and I would suggest you treat me with the same respect I'm treating you.
But do you ever think the L's and the G's and the B's go, I have an idea. The T's, I think it's LGB sounds good. And then somebody else would go, somebody with a hat that looked like Carmen Miranda's would go, no, I like LGBT. And then the other person, you're going to get a lot of trouble for this segment.